Hello, everybody.
Hey, hello.
Hi, Bernadine.
Hi. I'll move my table around a little bit there. Hi, Madeline. Mother Ernestine.
Hi, Bernadine. How are you?
I am fine, honey. How are you?
Great.
Look like I got your hairstyle.
you need to take off a little bit more.
I was thinking about it. I just got it done yesterday. There's always room for improvement. I can take down some more. I said, no, I'm sick of this. We can do better. So,
Bernadine, take the top of your laptop and just move it towards you. Yeah, perfect. Stop. There you go.
yes, I have it sitting on. It's on a little stand, so it's at an angle, and then
Yeah, now you're ready for your close-up.
Yeah.
We're just going to give it a few more minutes to allow more people to come in, and then we will begin.
Okay.
Hi, Taylor. We're looking forward.
It's a pleasure to see all your lovely faces on the screen.
Good. Pleasure to see you too.
Oh. I was just talking to my brother, Alfred, and he told me that my sister-in-law has been exposed to COVID. I'm not, I don't care how small of a bubble you live in. And she lives in, yeah, she's been exposed. So he's been exposed. Her husband's been exposed. There's 5 automatic days he can't go to work.
If he's been vaccinated, then that will be helpful for him.
Yes. Well, the city has these guidelines, you know. Right now he's working the leaf crew, so we'll see how that goes.
Okay, we will go ahead and start. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Diocese.
Ernestine, I accidentally muted you. I'm so sorry.
I got muted by our technical. So I guess I'll start all over again. Good evening again, everyone, and welcome to the Diocese of Oregon Working Group on Racial Justice, first program in a series of 4. This evening, we have Mr. Taylor Stewart, who started the Oregon Remembrance Project in 2018 to help communities unearth stories of injustice and engage in the necessary truth-telling and repair required to reconcile instances of historical harm. His work connects historical racism to its present-day legacies in order to inspire contemporary racial justice action. In what started as simply a way to memorialize a man named Alonzo Tucker, Oregon's first documented African-American victim of lynching, Taylor has grown to see the power of reconciliation to rectify further instances of historical injustice. How do you reconcile a lynching? The Equal Justice Initiative from Montgomery, Alabama, has documented nearly 6,500 100 lynchings of African Americans between 1865 and 1950. Taylor will share about the legacy of lynching, how we can find reconciliation, and how lynching is still a relevant topic for us today. Taylor will also share how you can get involved in helping find justice for Alonzo Tucker, Oregon's only documented African-American victim of lynching, who was lynched in Coos Bay in 1902. Before I turn over to Taylor, I would like to ask that you do not use your chat while we are doing the presentation, and also ask that you keep your cameras on as much as possible so we can see you and communicate with you. And to let you know that our next presentation will be on March 9th with Dr. Sandra Montez. It will be in Spanish and in English. And the following will be Dr. White Bear on May 11th. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Taylor Stewart. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you, Ernestine. All right, hello everyone. My name is Taylor Stewart, and I'm pleased to be speaking with you here tonight. 3 years ago, I was faced with the question, how do you reconcile a lynching? How do you find justice for historical injustice? Well, 3.5 years later, I believe I finally have the answer. This story starts the summer after I graduated college in 2018. I went on this trip called the Civil Rights Immersion, where we went to various locations of historical significance. We traveled to Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. I was especially looking forward to the portion of the trip where we'd be going to Montgomery because we had plans to see the new Equal Justice Initiative museums. You see, I was a big fan of Brian Stevenson, the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, and I had heard about these museums in one of my college classes. In April 2018, the Equal Justice Initiative opened up 2 museums. The first was the Legacy Museum, which chronicles the link between slavery and mass incarceration with the belief that slavery didn't end in 1865, it just evolved. The second was the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, or the Lynching Museum. The Equal Justice Initiative has documented nearly 6,500 lynchings of African Americans between the years of 1865 to 1950. When you enter the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, you are confronted with these 6-foot-high pillars that have the name of the state, the name of the county, and then the names of everyone who was lynched in that county. I had always known about lynching in the abstract, but to actually read the names of people who were lynched in this country made this history personal. I had no idea the magnitude of it all. Name after name after name. What got me most was seeing names with the last name Stewart, knowing that simply time and place separated me from the name on that pillar. As you make your way through the museum, the pillars, which are originally perpendicular to the floor, begin to come off the ground until finally they are hanging above you, symbolizing the way many of the victims of lynching died. As you continue, you begin to learn more about what was the culture of lynching in America. You learn that minor social transgressions could get you lynched. You learn that asking for a fair price in trade could get you lynched. You learn that sometimes when the white mob couldn't find who they were looking for, they would simply lynch an innocent bystander. When you stand in the center of the museum and look around you, you are surrounded by the 800 pillars, symbolizing the crowd that was so frequently present at these events. At this spot in the center, our tour guide told us about her hometown. This was a small town in Alabama. In this small town, businesses close early on Wednesdays. Not your big stores like Walmart or Walgreens, but your local stores, your mom and pop stores. They close early on Wednesdays because that's just tradition. Well, that tradition started so that everyone could make it to the lynchings on time because lynchings were held on Wednesdays. And despite the history of that tradition, businesses still close early on Wednesdays in this small Alabama town. I was awestruck. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice was the most heartbreaking part of our trip. I couldn't believe that no one had ever told me about lynching in America before. I couldn't believe that I had gone 22 years in this country knowing nothing about this history, and I couldn't believe that no one was talking about this. Why do we not talk about lynching in America? We talk about 9/11 as America's first experience with terrorism, but that's simply not true. There had long been an era of domestic terrorism in the United States, nearly 6,500 lynchings. That's more than just nearly 6,500 individuals. That's nearly 6,500 times the entire African-American community sustained an act of domestic terrorism, all in less than 100 years. This should really alter our perception of what life was like in America at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Lynching left thousands of African Americans dead, imposed racial subordination, forced the exodus of millions from the South, and diminished African Americans in this country's social, political, and economic life in ways that can still be felt today. Visiting the National Memorial for Peace and Justice was a profound encounter with history for me, an encounter that I wanted to bring home and share. Luckily, in conjunction with the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the Equal Justice Initiative also started the Community Remembrance Project. The Community Remembrance Project aims to work in the communities where the lynchings of African Americans took place to find healing and reconciliation through a sober reflection on history. I had lived in Oregon my whole life, and I couldn't believe that I had to go all the way to Montgomery, Alabama, just to learn that an African-American man named Alonzo Tucker was lynched in Coos Bay, Oregon in 1902. There is an interest forum online about getting involved with the Community Remembrance Project. Now, I would love to say that when I first saw that, I was immediately like, sign me up. How can I help? But that wouldn't be true. In fact, I was too nervous to fill out the interest form. After all, this was the Equal Justice Initiative, and I was a recent college grad with no relevant experience. I figured, who am I to really think that I could be of any help? So I decided I wasn't going to fill out the interest form. But thankfully, 2 encounters from the rest of my trip inspired me to change my mind. The first was a quote from John Lewis, longtime civil rights icon and congressman from Georgia, who asked, "If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" This inspired me with the fierce urgency of now. The second was the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Here at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, they just focused on Mississippi history. So there was no mention of Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, individuals who we kind of deify and are hard to relate to. Instead, the museum told the story of everyday Mississippians who did their part to pave the way for justice. And so there at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum is where I learned that you don't have to be an extraordinary person to do extraordinary things. And so those 2 encounters gave me the courage to reach out to the Equal Justice Initiative, and 3.5 years later, here we are. I'll talk a little bit more later about what we did in Coos Bay. As for now, I am here to tell you what I wish was told to me, so that when you go to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice one day, you won't have to say, "How come no one ever told me about lynching before?" I am here to tell you about the legacy of lynching, how we can find reconciliation, and how lynching is still a relevant topic to us today. Because despite what we may like to think, lynching was not the work of a few hooded vigilantes. Whole communities participated in the ritualistic killing of African Americans. The legacy of lynching was not hidden away in the shadows of the night. The legacy of lynching was broadcast in broad daylight on the courthouse lawn. The era of lynching may be behind us, but we as a nation won't ever be able to move past it until we confront this legacy. Lynching was domestic terrorism. And in this era of domestic terrorism, African Americans had to live under the constant fear that their actions could result in a lynching. White individuals accused of identical violations of law or custom were rarely subjected to the same fate. Lynching increasingly became a racialized tool of oppression over the African American population. This history should make us all feel uncomfortable. The barbarity, impunity, and spectacle of lynching are difficult to grapple with. What's most horrifying is the celebration of lynching, the way it was exalted in the white community. When you see pictures of lynchings, it's not the Black bodies that are most disturbing, it's the sea of white faces looking on that are most ominous. The way they smile, the way they lean into frame, I know no greater depths of depravity of humanity than lynching in America. Black suffering became white entertainment. So, what precipitated lynching? Well, a variety of things. One of the most common was the accusation of sexual assault, which was largely driven by the pervasive fear of interracial sex. During this time period, the mere accusation of rape was enough to incite a mob, and any action that could remotely be interpreted as a Black man seeking sexual contact with a white woman was subject to this pervasive fear. Something as innocuous as a Black man accidentally bumping into a white woman could result in the accusation of sexual assault. This would be because the myth of the Black male rapist permeated society, as it was a widely held belief at the time that white women couldn't willingly consent to sex with Black men. When famed anti-lynching advocate Ida B. Wells challenged this myth about lynching and asserted that when in fact there was a charge of rape, in many instances it was really a consensual relationship, a mob burned down her newspaper and threatened to lynch her. More than half of the Equal Justice Initiative documented lynching victims during the Jim Crow era were killed under some accusation of committing murder or rape. We cannot overstate the way the deep racial hostility of the time inspired increased suspicion on the Black community whenever a crime was discovered, even when little evidence tied the accused to the crime. Minstrel shows, racial science, and the racist chromolithography of the 20th century embedded in the minds of white America the presumption of Black guilt and attributed this to their perceived moral inferiority. However, it wasn't just accusations of a crime that resulted in lynching. Violating the rules of the social order also had fatal consequences. There was a saying at the time that what the law cannot do, the noose can. African Americans were lynched for things like speaking disrespectfully to a white person, refusing to step off the sidewalk, reprimanding white children, arguing with a white man, and other perceived social infractions. African Americans had to live with the constant knowledge that they could be lynched whether they intentionally or unintentionally violated social norms. And it was this violence that maintained and enforced the racial stratification of the Jim Crow era. I personally cannot imagine what it was like to be Black during this time and to have to travel into the white part of town knowing the slightest misstep could get you killed at any moment. But even more than that, I can't imagine going into the white community with the knowledge that that community was capable of a public spectacle lynching. These were festive community rituals that manifested a sinister component of the American identity. These were loud and rambunctious events akin to a sporting event. The roar of the crowd, the deafening boos, and the exuberant jubilation for a victim that finally met their fate incentivized fans to participate in this great American recreation. What I tell people is to remember what it was like the very first time you saw the video of George Floyd, to remember how sick it made you feel to watch someone plead for their life as that life was being taken away from them. But then to imagine that rather than feeling sick, you found that video pleasurable. Not only that, imagine you found it so pleasurable that you would get together with your friends so that you could all enjoy the video together. Imagine getting a whole crowd of people together on that Minneapolis street so that you could all be there live for the killing of George Floyd, because that's what public spectacle lynchings were like. Public spectacle lynchings were those in which large numbers of people, sometimes in the thousands, gathered to witness the pre-planned killing of an African American in a manner that included prolonged torture, dismemberment, and/or burning of the victim. These were carnival-like events that included food vendors, photographs, and the selling of body parts. It was especially popular at that time to take a picture of the lynching that would then be turned into a postcard that could then be distributed to friends, family, or merely kept as a souvenir. Young children would collect the kindling for the fire they would use to burn victims alive, and as those children got older, it became a rite of passage into adulthood to take a more active role in this community ritual. Sometimes the mob would discuss how they were going to distribute the lynching victim's body parts in front of the lynching victim while they were still alive. And those body parts would then be kept as cherished family heirlooms and passed from one generation to the next. Public spectacle lynchings were brazen, celebratory acts of sadism that implicated the whole white community and sent a clear message that Blacks were undeserving of even the slightest bit of human dignity. This would be because lynching was always meant to send a message. Lynching was about much more than simply killing someone. It was meant to terrorize. You know, my biggest takeaway from the first week of the Derek Chauvin trial was how traumatized the bystanders were from George Floyd's murder. Witnessing that level of callous violence has left an indelible impact on the psyche of these individuals, and they will live with this PTSD for the rest of their lives. I can't even begin to imagine the trauma that resulted from white mobs forcing other Black people to witness lynchings. Some mobs would specifically harness this terror and disrupt any feelings of safety in one's community by conducting their lynchings within the Black part of town, and many other times dragging the body of a lynching victim behind a car throughout the Black community to continually instill this fear. And in the face of this terror, sometimes Black people were lynched simply for asserting their own humanity. The targets of these lynchings were frequently sharecroppers, ministers, and community leaders who resisted being mistreated or espoused Black advancement beyond the confines of the Jim Crow era. These are the lynchings that bother me the most, because if I were doing this work 100 years ago, I would probably be one of these lynching victims. Lynching became a tool to keep African Americans in a state of subjugation and repress African Americans' fight for economic power and equal rights during the 19th and 20th centuries. It is difficult to fathom what life must have been like for African Americans living during this time. One can't even begin to understand the collective trauma associated with having to watch your friends, your family, your community lynched over and over again. We talk about how difficult it was on the Black community to see Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd all killed in such quick succession. I can't even imagine the psychological toll that would have taken had those all been brutal lynchings. I believe we must pay witness to this era of domestic terrorism. We cannot say enough about the psychological wounds inflicted on the African American community, nor can we understate the deep psychological damage the white community passed on from generation to generation in the socialization of violence. Nor can we ignore our state institutions' indifference and complicity of lynching. And so, as we talk about lynching today, I am here to tell you that we are not as far removed from lynching culture as we would like to think. Because if we really want to see how lynching has survived, we need not look further than the American death penalty. Our death penalty is the most direct legacy of lynching, because at the same time Lynchings in the United States started to go down. Executions started to go up. Lynching simply moved indoors, where all white juries and expedited trials carried out the same verdict as the lynch mob. During the 1930s, 2/3 of all executions in the United States were of African Americans. Between the years of 1910 to 1950, despite making up only 22% of the South's population, African Americans accounted for 75% of all of those who were executed in this region, and this disproportionality continues to today, where African Americans make up 13% of the population, but 41% of those who are on death row. When you consider the fact that of that 41%, nearly all are African American males, yet African American males only make up 6.5% of our population, we have to ask ourselves, how do we get from 6.5 to 41%? The color of your skin still plays a crucial role in whether our society believes you deserve death or not. When we look at someone and are comfortable saying, you deserve to die, that decision is tainted by racial bias. In 2014, there was a study out of the University of Washington that looked at jurors in Washington state and found that jurors were 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a Black defendant than for a white defendant accused of similar crimes. Nearly every study that has looked at the issue of race of victim in capital punishment sentencing has found that you are more likely to get the death sentence if the victim is white. This is especially true if the defendant is Black. We still treat the accusation of Black on white crime differently. Between 1930 to 1972, 455 individuals in the United States were executed for the charge of rape, and 89% were African American. No white man in the history of the United States has ever been executed for the rape of a Black woman or girl in a non-homicide offense, ever. Of the 316 individuals who have been executed for an interracial homicide since 1976, 93% have been about Black on white crime. Our society still makes no secret about whose life has value and whose does not. Of the 186 individuals who have been exonerated from death row since 1976, meaning individuals who are wrongfully arrested, wrongfully convicted, wrongfully put in prison, wrongfully put on death row, over half have been African American. We are still trying to kill innocent Black people. In Arkansas, it was recently discovered that the DNA on a murder weapon did not match that of an African American man who had maintained his innocence over the 22 years he was in prison. Only problem is, Arkansas executed this man in 2017. The states in the South, plus Oklahoma and Missouri, had the highest number of lynchings. And since 1976, those states alone have accounted for 86% of all executions in the United States. The same region of the country that lynched is the same region of the country that executes. We are too busy asking ourselves the question, does this person deserve to die for their crimes, that we haven't first asked ourselves the question, do we deserve to kill? Because if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter what the answer is to that first question. Did you know Germany doesn't have the death penalty? Germany knows that given their history, it would be unconscionable for the country of Germany to systematically execute its citizens, especially if a disproportionate number of those citizens were Jewish. The world would be in outrage. We in the United States would be outraged if that were the case. So where's that same outrage when, given our history, the United States systematically executes its citizens and a disproportionate number of those citizens are African American? Where's the outrage when, given our history as a state, a disproportionate number of African Americans sit on Oregon's death row? Where is the outrage? Because I don't hear it. The moral outrage of future generations is hypocritical. We condemn the institution of lynching, while failing to condemn its legacy. Everyone wants to say that if they had been around during the lynching era, they wouldn't have stood by, they would have said something, they would have done something. Well, I can tell you, lynching is still going on, you're still standing by, still not saying anything, still not doing anything. We are burdened by our history of injustice, but more importantly, we are burdened by our history of repeating injustice. But I am here to tell you it doesn't have to be this way. We have the power to recreate our relationship with history and rewrite the ending to history stories. That's what we tried to do in Coos Bay, Oregon. Our collective memory and our collective consciousness hold power. What we choose to remember, as well as how we choose to remember history, is a reflection of the soul of our society. We cannot change the past, but we can always change our relationship to the past. So, for 3 years, I worked with the community of Coos Bay to engage in the requisite truth-telling required to get to reconciliation. This truth-telling began on February 29th, 2020, with the soil collection ceremony for Alonzo Tucker near the spot where he was killed. We collected 2 jars of soil, one that was sent back to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, and the other that is now on display at the Coos History Museum. Hidden in this soil was the story of Alonzo Tucker. The soil was gathered from 3 locations, and each bit of soil tells part of Alonzo Tucker's story. The first bit was gathered from underneath the mudflats of the local docks, where Alonzo Tucker spent the night hiding from a mob that had formed to lynch him after he had been accused of sexually assaulting a white woman. The second bit was gathered from Front Street, where Alonzo Tucker was repeatedly shot and left incapacitated before a noose was placed around his neck and he was thrown in the back of a cart with the intention of lynching him from the spot of the alleged assault. However, they wouldn't make it that far, as Alonzo Tucker would die from the gunshot wound. So the third bit of soil was gathered from where the old Marshfield Bridge used to be, which is where the mob strung up Alonzo Tucker's dead body from a light pole in front of a crowd of 300. Even children were a part of the lynch mob that left Alonzo Tucker's body hanging there for several hours. Despite this all occurring in broad daylight without a masked man in the crowd, no one would ever be held accountable for the lynching of Alonzo Tucker. News of this lynching made headlines across Oregon and even across the country, and most newspapers openly sympathized with the lynch mob. Following this event, African Americans would then flee the Coos Bay area over fears of future violence. In 1974, a Coos Bay World newspaper reporter interviewed 3 white men who were boys at the time of the 1902 lynching, and they provided eyewitness accounts. All 3 men believed Alonzo Tucker was lynched over a consensual relationship with the woman who accused him of assault. We began this truth-telling work with the soil ceremony, and we continued that work by permanently installing this history into the geographic memory of Oregon. On June 19th, 2021, we unveiled an Equal Justice Initiative historical marker in Coos Bay. One side tells the story of lynching in America as a whole, and the other side tells the story of Alonzo Tucker. This visible acknowledgement serves to memorialize Alonzo Tucker in the collective memory and collective consciousness of Coos Bay. Alonzo Tucker's life may have ended from a light pole on the Marshfield Bridge, but that's not where his story now ends. At the unveiling ceremony, we had over 600 people, double that who were at the 1902 lynching, paying witness to this injustice as we meaningfully added a new chapter to Alonzo Tucker's story. By giving voice to this story in such a permanent way, we hope to get closer to reconciling our relationship with history. However, we find reconciliation for this lynching not by our acts of remembrance, but by how those acts of remembrance change us. We find reconciliation not by our knowledge of lynching, but by what we do with that knowledge. We find reconciliation not by reflecting solely on the past, but by critically evaluating the present. So, how do you reconcile lynching? It starts with remembrance, then it moves to repair. Now, we must repair the fundamental question of who our society believes deserves death, because the answer continues to be disproportionately African American. Public remembrance only goes so far. It requires action in the present day to repair the harms of the past. I don't believe we can truly find reconciliation for lynching until we put an end to the heir to its legacy, the death penalty. 3.5 years ago, I set out to reconcile the lynching of Alonzo Tucker, and that is still my goal. I've just learned along the way that it's going to take more than a few acts of remembrance. The Oregon Supreme Court recently overturned the death sentence of an inmate due to the 2019 passage of Senate Bill 1013, which limited the scope of offenses eligible for the death penalty. It's likely that the remaining 23 death sentences will similarly be overturned. However, while this ruling and Senate Bill 1013 make the death penalty in Oregon nearly non-existent, there must still remain an urgency for a full repeal. Oregon voters are the only ones with the power to ultimately end the death penalty in Oregon by voting to remove it from the state constitution. While in many ways it will be a symbolic vote, symbolism matters and reflects the type of society that we want to be. It was symbolic in 1926 when Oregon repealed its Black exclusionary laws. It was symbolic in 1959 when Oregon ratified the 15th Amendment, and it was symbolic in 1973 when Oregon ratified the 14th Amendment. And while symbolic, these actions mattered to history, and it matters to the memory of Alonzo Tucker that we still have a death penalty. I accept the things that I cannot change, and I change the things that I cannot accept, and I cannot accept race being the largest predictive factor in capital punishment sentencing. I cannot accept the continuation of lynching, and most importantly, I cannot accept that no one is talking about this. So, I need your help to reconcile the lynching of Alonzo Tucker, because I can't do it by myself. I need your help to end the death penalty in Oregon, because the answer to the question of what would you have done had you been around during the lynching era is what are you doing about lynching right now? So there are 3 things you can do to help this cause. First, follow the Oregon Remembrance Project on social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Second, share the death penalty conversation slides that you can find on the Oregon Remembrance Project's website. But third, and most importantly, I just need you to tell someone about lynching and the death penalty. We end the death penalty in Oregon one conversation at a time, and I'm imploring you to start these conversations, because our failure to confront the origins of systemic injustice is what has allowed those injustices to evolve. People ask me if I really think this connection between lynching and the death penalty will change hearts and minds. Well, let me tell you, I know it does, because it changed my mind. I wasn't always this person. I grew up in a conservative, white, evangelical environment, and I was a product of that environment. I missed out on one of the most important days of my life in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected the first Black president of the United States, because had I been old enough, I would have voted for John McCain and Sarah Palin. I graduated high school a registered Republican with the dream of becoming a tough on crime prosecutor. I used to be a passionate supporter of the death penalty. I gave a speech my junior year of college in favor of capital punishment, and I'm not that old, so that wasn't that long ago. But then I learned about lynching, and I learned about its connection to the death penalty. And I realized that there is no justice unless there's equal justice under law. That's what it says on the Supreme Court. But our system that we depend upon to dispense the most ultimate form of justice is too flawed to produce anything but injustice. I would say it's broken, but it's functioning exactly the way it was intended, as a replacement for lynching. We lose hope when we stop believing individuals and communities can change, So I choose to remain hopeful. You may not think you can make a meaningful difference, but I believe you can. One conversation at a time, one friend at a time, one community at a time. I believe that you can be a part of a grassroots movement to repair the harms of the past and end the death penalty in Oregon. It just takes the political will. I learned from my trip to the South that it's okay to believe in something even when you've never seen it before. And it's okay to see something even when others don't believe in it. 3.5 years ago, people thought I was crazy for thinking I could put a historical marker about lynching in Coos Bay, Oregon. But I'm an optimist. I believe that no matter where you go, you can find enough people who are willing to choose justice if given the opportunity. It's just a matter of getting them to see where there's been injustice. If I've learned anything over these last 3.5 years, it's that it's less about being the right person for the moment as it is about doing the right thing for the moment. Even Martin Luther King Jr. didn't think he was the right person for the moment, but he acted anyway because he knew it was the right thing to do. On December 5th, 1955, a little-known pastor accepted the nomination to become president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, gave his first large public address, and the rest is history. Stepping into that moment is what made him the right person. So I'm asking you to step with me into this moment. When I was younger, I used to think that it was remarkable people that did remarkable things. However, the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that it's remarkable things that make remarkable people. And I believe that you can be a part of something that's remarkable. Don't underestimate your ability to be the change you want to see in this world, because let me tell you, you don't have to be an extraordinary person to do extraordinary things. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker. Thank you. Yes, we can do our clapping online. At this time, we have some period of time for question and answers for anybody who wants to ask Tucker some questions. If you could use your raise hand in the reaction box at the bottom of your screen, raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question. Nobody?
Allie and Michael both have their hands up.
Okay, I'm not saying, okay, Ali, go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks, Taylor, so much for your presentation. And I was wondering, I've heard rumors of something happening with the community in Grants Pass, and I was hoping that you might be able to talk about that.
Yeah, so I finished the historical marker, and this was a Saturday. And I remember I started my work week that next Monday, and it was kind of like, now what? This thing that I've been trying to do for the last 3 years is now all of a sudden over. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And so, there's this, once again, I thought, and it was fitting because his quote is what got me started in this work. But John Lewis has a quote of "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America." And that really resonated with me that week following the historical marker installation. And so I was like, all right, John, that's what I'm gonna do. And so I've brought this truth and reconciliation work about how can we do things today to sort of repair the instances of historical injustice from the past. And so I've had the pleasure of starting to work with the community of Grants Pass, Oregon, to do something regarding Grants Pass's history as a sundown town. For those of you who don't know, sundown towns were communities that purposefully excluded African Americans and other racial minorities from living within the community. Sometimes they would be allowed to pass through town during the day, but they had better be out by night or else. The title of this work is the Sunrise Project, with the idea that sunrise is the opposite to sundown and signals the start of a new day. Our tagline is from sundown to sunrise, and we're looking to create the first ever sunrise community. I would love to say that it was my idea to use the word sunrise, but that idea came from a 69-year-old white male truck driver from Grants Pass. And that's what this work is all about, bringing together ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And so right now, I'm working on an educational resource on what sundown towns look like, both nationally and locally, how that exclusion evolved into the present, and then the next steps a community can take to building a more inclusive environment. And so we're hoping to culminate this work in the installation of a historical marker, one side talking about racial exclusion in Oregon and Grants Pass, and the other side functioning as Grants Pass's stated commitment to inclusivity. And so while it's the culmination of work, it's really the start of a never-ending journey to live out the ideals that are written on the marker. And if we're successful, this will be the first marker about sundown towns in the United States. And so hoping to both expand this work here in Oregon and then hopefully across the country.
Thank you, Taylor. Michael.
Hello, this was a remarkable presentation, Taylor. I am so happy that you shared this presentation with us tonight, and all great things will come to you in the future. I'd like to know if you would like us to help you to do anything going forward, such as getting this presentation on Oregon Public Radio, or you have your eye on law school, and do we need to make a call to somebody at law schools? Do we need to make it? We are assembled to. Not all of us can pull every lever to do everything, but keep us in mind if you think that you would like to do something where we might be able to help you to get your story and your career and your presence in our country, in our world, even more fully understood by others.
Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate that so much. I'll tell you a brief story, then I'll answer the rest of the question. But I actually went to law school for a day and a half. I spent my entire life wanting to be a lawyer, 90% of that wanting to be a prosecutor, but at the very end of my time, I switched to wanting to do civil rights law. I wanted to be Brian Stevenson. And so I got to Lewis and Clark Law School the summer of 2018. And there was a student panel at orientation the first day. And into the panel, they were asked the question, what happens when topics of race, gender, sexuality, etc. come up in class? And I was like, yes, I'm here for civil rights law. What is that like in class? And they were like, we don't talk about it. We want to, but our professors and our peers don't want to have these conversations, even when we feel it's material to the case. You can pursue those topics outside of class, but when it came to class, not so much. And so I remember sitting there and feeling like, well, then I don't want to go to class. I don't want to have to go to law school and pursue my whole reason for wanting to be here on the side. And I saw how frustrated those students were from seemingly bang their head up against a wall for 3 years, that I remember sitting there and just feeling like, I don't want to be you in 3 years. And so the next day I went into my advisor's office and told her I was leaving law school. And
Wow.
I'll never forget getting in my car and thinking, I just hit reset on my entire life. I remember looking at my phone and thinking, my calendar just freed up to Thanksgiving, and it's August. And I'll never forget driving home, wondering whether I just made the biggest mistake of my life. But fast forward 3 years, and I couldn't be happier meeting folks like yourselves to sort of bring this work and this inspiration about why we don't necessarily need to feel powerless to historical injustice. There are things that we can do to both repair the past and in doing so, repair our present. And so I'm passionate about this truth and reconciliation work. And any opportunities to speak at other locations, I would gladly welcome. I'll put my email in the chat, and I would love to reach out to you and speak at other locations. And so in terms of other things you can do, so we really are looking at a 2024 bill for ending the death penalty. 2022, we'll be holding a sort of summit with some of the leaders in Oregon to sort of plan the way forward. 2023 will be sort of focus groups and message working on, and then 2024 will be sort of the election year. And so prior to that, one thing that you can do to help is May 28th, I'll be giving a TED Talk with TEDx Portland about how do you reconcile lynching. Tickets on sale now. It'll be at the Moda Center. It'll be a great day of conversation, but hoping to use this conversation as an opportunity to elevate this connection between lynching and the death penalty, and how we sort of can use this era of racial justice to engage in this historical repair. And I tell people that the Oregon Remembrance Project is one individual, but it doesn't mean this has been an individual effort. And so meeting folks in communities like yourself, I find folks who walk with me along this journey, and I'm grateful just to be in community with you here tonight.
Thank you so much. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone here to say, especially given your age and our age, we are proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Taylor, you answered one of the questions in the chat from Elizabeth Klein about a bill to end capital punishment in Oregon. So do you have the title of that bill? Can we put it in the chat so we can have the information?
Not yet.
Not yet?
So
Okay.
in the next year to year and a half, so because of the way the death penalty is, it's in the Oregon State Constitution. It can't just be gotten rid of with sort of the state legislatures. And so it has to go on the ballot. And with big ticket items, people generally run on presidential years. And so that's why it would have been sort of a rush for 2022. So looking at 2024. And so there are two ways, either introducing it with signatures or introducing it through the state legislature. And so what we'll be doing in this sort of next year is getting some of those initial conversation with state legislators who can then introduce the bill. And then come November 2024, it'll be on your ballot.
Great. Thank you. Krista, you had a question?
Hi, Taylor. Thank you so much for sharing. I wondered if you could speak to your experience in sharing this newfound knowledge and passion with the people closest to you. And I know that you are clearly a gifted speaker, and giving this presentation is one thing, but sometimes around the dinner table with our family or our closest friends who have known us or people we grew up with, it can be hard. And so for those of us trying to navigate these conversations across the table with those people that we love but have known us forever, do you have any advice or anything that you could share about that from your experience in the last handful of years?
Yes. Well, I'm also just like this always. My parents would be like, yes, he is like that at the dinner table. But some of the things that we're talking about in Grants Pass is related to this question of how can we meet each other in this middle space, apart from conservative, liberal, how can we meet each other over common values? And one of the questions that I've gotten in the past is, what changed? And I've always said that, my values never changed, but my understanding of them did. I was always passionate about justice, which is why I was wanting to be a tough on crime prosecutor. But as my understanding of that changed and my awareness of injustice sort of came into my life, it shifted my perspective. And, one thing that I always like to tell people is there was never one light bulb moment, no one conversation, no one class where I was like, oh my gosh, I've seen the light. But instead it was a gradual shift over 2.5 years. And also influenced by this really remarkable trip to the South. And so taking the pressure away from yourself of, you're not going to solve racism with your family over Thanksgiving. So like, don't feel the pressure to do so, but introducing and creating that common space of, this is, in order to be who we want to see ourselves as, there are some things that we can do. And so for me, it's apart from, even in Trump won Coos County by 11 points. But in Coos Bay, at the historical marker unveiling, all the people there were like, yeah, let's end the death penalty. And so even this is a sort of these ideas of repairing our history. One thing, so like in this idea of reconciliation, I've been thinking about 3 R words: remembrance, repair, and redemption. And that we understand that in order to get to redemption, we have to do something. And if we have these positive endpoints, I feel that it can bring people along. We can all agree that we can't change the past, and so we might as well do things to change our relationship to the past. And at least in Coos Bay, the idea of rewriting the ending to history stories was a mode of thinking that allowed people to take ownership and wanting to be a part of this work. And so finding those common space languages in means of spurring justice is my recommendation. And so hopefully, if you go on the Oregon Remembrance Project's website, you'll find the little conversation slides and they will be helpful to you. But even just having this conversation around the dinner table, even if they don't leave going like, yes, I'm gonna now devote the rest of my life to this, you've made a difference and you've started planting the seed, and you have until 2024 to continue watering it. And I'm grateful for your willingness to be a part of this. And so thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. And thank you, Taylor, for such a passionate and inspirational presentation. I'm so inspired. This is the second time I've heard you. I think the first time was at Reckoning with Race. So thank you for contributing your life to this cause. I have a question. As you are researching on Alonzo Tucker at Coos Bay and the history of Oregon, have you come across about what was the part that faith community play in all this lynching? How are we complicit? Were there any people that actually stood up and say, no, this has to stop? And that's kind of like, I'm really curious about that, because our diocese is really working on the forensic aspect of really understanding our own history and our complicity. And because we cannot make repairs, we cannot come to repentance or repair the breach if we don't understand our own history and what part we play. So I'm just curious to see whether have you found out anything about what role faith community has played in all this lynching and whether people of faith actually stood by.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. There is Daniel chapter 9. It's called the Prayer of Daniel, and it's a passage of the Bible that's relevant to this conversation. In it, he prays to God over the sins of his ancestors in this sort of effort to right himself with history and with God. And so while he didn't actually play a part in that original sin, he understood that legacy was still relevant to him today. And this is even after the Lion's Den, where I was like, dude, you proved yourself. And so even in that spirit, he's still trying to be a part of this idea of historical justice. And so, specifically, I haven't come across much sort of church involvement in some of this historical racism beyond sort of the so the Ku Klux Klan was very high in sort of Protestantism, and Oregon had the largest Ku Klux Klan west of Mississippi. I'll tell you some interesting Klan facts. So at the height of their powers during the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan in Oregon had about 35,000 members, with 15,000 being in Portland. And so Portland, not anywhere else, was actually the central operating hub of the Klan in Oregon. Their main enemy was the Catholics, and they didn't actually concern themselves that much with people of color because they outnumbered them so much. During the 1920s, there were 2.5 times more Klan members in Oregon than people of color. There were more Klan members in Portland than people of color in the entire state of Oregon. At the height of their powers, the Klan of Oregon made up 4% of the state's population, which if they were as prevalent today as they were back then, would be nearly 169,000 members, which happens to be double the number of African Americans in the state. And so you imagine that every time you see an African American, there are 2 Klan members next to them, because that's how prevalent the Klan was in Oregon. And so as I'm, doing this research, we're in a centennial mark here in the 2020s from when the Klan was active in Oregon. And so I'm really wanting to use this whole decade as a sort of inflection and reflection point on what is our relationship to the legacy of that racism. And so as I continue to dig in, I will get closer and closer to the church's complicity and endorsement of this. And so I hope that you will follow the journey of the Oregon Remembrance Project, because I would love to be able to dive into that with folks like yourselves.
Just as an aside, Oregon had a card-carrying Klan member who served as governor. Governor Pierce, I believe, was the governor of Oregon. He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, to show you how prevalent they were. Any more questions? I'm not seeing any hands up. Yes, Barbara.
Yeah. Also, Jennifer has her hand.
I just wanted to comment about an addition on the Klan and articles we read at Trinity. Most of the Klan members held political office all over Oregon. So it was the whole system besides the
governor.
Yeah, well, besides the governor, but also all the laws eliminating the possibility of Black people even being residents in the state. So, I mean, that was one way they kept the population so small. And I did have a question for Taylor, if you have collaborated with the Black Pioneers of Oregon at all?
Yes, Zachary Stock's friend. Right. He was at the historical marker unveiling. And so I foresee a close relationship with he and I over that. We've talked about these dreams of this physical narrative space in Portland. So we'll be working together closely.
And also the Coalition of Communities of Color, which works a lot on pieces of legislation. They're really powerful. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but
yes, tangentially, okay. I had a friend who used to work for them, and I'm starting to branch into some work in Portland, and as I become more sort of legislatively active, they're definitely one of the groups of folks that I'm wanting to bring into. So when we have this sort of death penalty summit, definitely one of the folks I want to bring along. And so we'll be doing this together.
Awesome. I think that's great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Jennifer?
Well, first, thank you, Taylor. And I've been to Mississippi and followed part of the trail, the Civil Rights Trail and the markers. And I just have this very exciting vision of what you're doing, having markers spread around Oregon that will, that are located in communities, educating us all for generations to come. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, my hope in all of this has been to try to do for others what was done for me. One of the reasons I gravitate towards these historical markers is I myself had such a moving encounter with them in the South. I remember, while you're just reading information, it is information where you're like, how did I have to go to a historical marker to learn this? How is this not just a part of our collective knowledge? And so being able to, I came back to Oregon and I was like, there is no spaces in the entire state to have a point of reflection on the history of lynching. And so my hope is to be able to add these I call them touchstones of justice across the state where we can both learn and reflect. So with the historical marker in Coos Bay, there's 2 dates of significance on the marker: 1902 when the lynching occurred, and then 2021 when the historical marker was unveiled. And so we can't understand the story of Alonzo Tucker just focusing on the 1902 date. That 2021 date is now irrelevant and a part of the story. And so my hope is that not only do folks encounter this history, they can feel empowered to sort of want to do something about it. And so as we learn all these difficult stories of injustice, it's like, let's rewrite the ending. And so we were able to do that with the story of Alonzo Tucker. Hopefully we'll do that in Grants Pass with Sundown Towns, and then the rest of the Oregon, here we come.
Yeah, I'm really
Thank
intrigued with a couple of, well, just hearing you talk further about it, wondering if there's been any violence actually done to the marker, much as some of the markers, particularly Emmett Till's in Mississippi, has experienced so much violence, at the unearthing of the history. And I was also wondering how you begin in Coos Bay, how you began, and how, I don't know if we have time for it, but I'm really interested in how you begin your conversations with communities such as Grants Pass.
Mm-hmm. So I actually was just on a call earlier today with the Coos Bay History Museum. And so we did the historical marker as part of Coos Bay's first ever Juneteenth celebration. And now the Coos History Museum is kicking off all their summer celebrations with Juneteenth. And so this was just a call about what the second one will be. And it's been very encouraging to see the growth of it. And so I look forward to going down to Coos Bay to be like, oh my gosh, this would have been impossible 2 or 3 years ago. And so, and one of the things was there hasn't been any vandalism to the sign yet. And one of the reasons why it was sort of that way is this was able to come from within the community. And so this wasn't just some random kid from Portland who put a historical marker in Coos Bay. It was the community of Coos Bay who was able to do this sort of together. And so because it was able to have both the buy-in of the city government was, the city of Coos Bay was a part of the celebration. And so because we had sort of this institutional support, it didn't feel, it was less scary or foreign or threatening, that this was able to come from within the community. And so that's what we're trying to do in Grants Pass. And that's part of creating that long lasting change. So like in Grants Pass, we can't just put a marker and then we're like, all right, we're a sunrise community. But it's that getting it to come from within the community that they can sort of, by asking those questions, eventually become the answer to what they're looking for. And so that's what we're hoping to do in Grants Pass, and that's sort of how I've gone about it so far. And I go back 3.5 years ago. I showed up to Coos Bay, and it's been nice. When I was at Grants Pass, it was like, okay, I've gotten better at this. When I first went down to Coos Bay, I was like, what in the world am I doing? I filled out the interest form for the Equal Justice Initiative, and eventually they connected me to 3 other people who have filled out the same form. And surprise, everyone was from Portland. And so I remember we went to a McMinimum's downtown to meet. And I'll never forget driving there thinking, I can't wait to meet who's gonna lead this. And I remember driving home and I was like, oh no. And so, that's what this sort of all of this work has been about. Constantly, I was like, who is gonna do this? And you're like, oh no, I guess it's me. And so that's sort of what this whole story has been about, that, I was never the right person to get started in doing this, but by doing the right things, I was able to become the right person. And so that's why my hope is that your biggest takeaway from this is the idea that you don't have to be an extraordinary person to do extraordinary things. And I hope that you'll take action in your own life.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for your wonderful presentation, your inspiring words, your encouragement. And I think for everybody who is maybe intimidated or frightened by this, it starts with small steps. I mean, he took a course and the inspiration followed from that. I think it's just our willingness to be open, to listen to the possibilities, and to hear what things that, yes, God is calling us to do. Like he said, he was expecting somebody else to lead this. And at each step of the way, he was the person who was called to do the leadership. And he continues to do that. So Taylor, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to allow God to use you in this work. Thank you very much.
No, and thank you all. It's not if anything, you've already taken the first step. The first step is being like, yeah, I'm going to listen to a presentation about lynching on a Wednesday evening. So you've already taken that first step, and I thank you for having this conversation with me.
Thank you. Just want to remind us again that our next presentation is going to be on March 9th, and it's going to be Dr. Sandra Montez. 6 o'clock session will be in Spanish, and another session at 7:30 will be in English. And then following that on May 11th, Dr. White Bear, and that will be at 7 p.m. Alan, you had your hand up before do you know? Okay. So everybody, thank you again so much for
Thank you.
giving of your time to be with us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you again in March. And look
Have
for
a wonderful rest of your evening, everyone.
Look for opportunities to get involved.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much, Taylor.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Night.
Taylor. Thanks, Ernestine.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ernestine.
Taylor. Thank you, Ernestine.
Michael.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Ernestine.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I just want to point out for the last few folks, Randolph right now on the call is the genius behind Sunrise. I'm telling his story, and that's the genius himself.
Hi, Randolph. Genius, man.
Genius, man. Hey, hello, folks. I thought this thing started at 8. Did I miss? Oh,
We have it recorded for you, Randolph, and I can send you an email with the
great.
recording once it's available.
Great, good. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Taylor, I'm curious about what small town in Alabama? Our stores on.
You know, I wish I could remember. It's one of those things where it's just a memory that's seared into my mind, and it was so shocking. I was like, I literally could not remember at all what name you just said. This information is just taken up all of my mental processing. Because so where we were was, so there's 800 pillars, and they sort of make a square where the museum is. And in the very middle, there's a hill. At the very top of the hill, there's sort of a wooden plank that is supposed to symbolize the platform with which these lynchings occurred. And so when you look out at all the pillars, it's a very isolating experience because you're up higher than everyone else.
Yeah.
And so it's just you and then all these pillars. And so much was happening to my emotions at that moment. So I don't remember the name of the town, but that experience is just seared into my memory.
The reason I asked is because I lived in a very small town in Alabama for about a year. I wasn't there much because I was traveling with my job, but I can picture that happening in that town.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that that anybody who gets the opportunity to go and visit the Equal Justice Initiative, it is as you said, Taylor, it is an experience that really changes your life. And I think for me, the thing that really just broke me down was after you go up the hill and you start to come down and against the wall, it gives you all the reasons why people were lynched. And the reasons were so, I mean, to show how African American lives were devalued, the most asinine, like there was a young man and an older man would not get off the sidewalk for him to pass. And so that was a reason for the man to be lynched. And there's so many reasons, one after the other. And as I walked down, it was just crushing that we who claim to be so civilized and so godly could do that to one another, to do that to a people. So it's a gut-wrenching experience. It really was. And then you would see on the stones, you would see the state, the county, and you would see the list of whole families who were lynched, including children. Whew.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well,